thank you for joining us. My name is Scott Lowenstein. I'm a second-year MBA and a student leader for the Corporations and Society Initiative, or CASI, which is one of the co-sponsors of the event today, along with the Center for Internet and Society and CS plus Social Good. CASI is about bringing together experts with business students and policymakers to ask questions and bring a broader perspective of the role of corporations and capitalism in society today. Through research, education, advocacy, CASI is trying to redefine or question some of the assumptions that form the core of the role of private and public institutions in our lives. And today we're talking about tech. In many ways, the current crop of business school students kind of grew up with platform media. I remember my sister showing me the Facebook when it was a .edu kind of place. And I also remember in 2011 when Facebook was saving democracy and civil society around the world. And now we're in an event called Zucked, so the times have changed. But it's this kind of evolving Facebook conversation that's a perfect fit for what CASI is trying to do. Asking questions like, what does Facebook owe users, shareholders, society at large? Is internet addiction and fake news the inevitable output of a sort of shareholder value maximization model in the internet age? And how do we kind of tame or tamp down some of this, what Tristan Harris calls runaway attention maximizing technology? So it's these questions and many more that Roger McNamee addresses in his book, Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe. Roger has 35 years of investing experience in Silicon Valley. He was an early advisor to Mark Zuckerberg. His most recent fund, Elevation, was co-founded by U2's Bono, and when he's not on book tour, he's rocking out with his band, Moon Alice. I can't wait to hear about Roger's sort of personal transformation from Facebook champion to a whistleblower of sorts about the dangers of the platform. And in moderating that conversation is Anne Grimes. Anne is an award-winning journalist who held senior editorial positions at the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. She ran Stanford's graduate journalism program. She now is the co-director of the Brown Institute for Media Innovation in the engineering department. And she's taught all over the school in CS and engineering at the D School, and here at the business school in a class on media entrepreneurship, which is where I first heard Roger talk about some of these ideas last year. Following their conversation, we'll have some questions from students in the audience, but now please join me in thanking and welcoming Anne and Roger.
Hi, welcome. It's great to see such a big crowd here at your lunch hour, so thanks everybody for showing up, and thank you, Roger.
No, my pleasure.
Let me start off by saying that Roger and I have known each other for a while now, since my days at the Wall Street Journal when I was covering venture capital, and I thought of him as just another venture capitalist. But look at you now. You've written a really thoughtful, readable, well-scripted book. It's a bestseller. It's a great read. You're killing it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you're scaring me, not just because you're sort of moving in on my writing turf here, but because what you're telling us all is that it looks like we are all really zucked. So before we start, how many folks have read Roger's book or have bought Roger's book?
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right.
I'm serious.
Books will be on sale out in the vestibule, so don't be shy with your wallets. So let me say a little bit about the book before we start our conversation. The tone of the book is really interesting. It's a manifesto of sorts. It's a call to action, and the tone is very thoughtful. In the book, Roger starts by saying that he is an investor. He was an early investor in Facebook, and he still has his investment in Facebook. But that he learned that he felt his trust in Facebook was misplaced. And this is largely a story about trust. You say that even though Facebook provides a compelling experience for most users, it is terrible for America. It needs to be changed. You describe Facebook as a threat. Technology, like Facebook's, you say, allows it to manipulate our attention. The design of Facebook allows bad actors to exploit it and harm innocent people. Democracy has been undermined because of design choices and business decisions by internet platforms, not just Facebook, but many others, that deny responsibility for the consequences of their actions. The culture of these companies causes employees to be indifferent to the negative side effects of their success. You say these platforms have taken advantage of our trust, and you say you have had a conversion experience. This sounds like tough love to me, and there's a lot to unpack there. But before we do that, let's start a little bit with the backstory here. Tell us a bit more about your background and how you got involved with Facebook in the first place.
How many of you were at GSB, just for laughs to see? Okay, so here's the thing. They don't tell you this in business school. I mean, they certainly didn't tell me. If you can, literally, what you really need to have a successful career is just incredible good luck. I started my career on the first day of the bull market of 1982. They assigned me to technology. I mean, I wanted to do tech, but they let me do tech. And this is in the days when the space shuttle was the biggest thing going on in Silicon Valley and in the tech industry. So it meant I had, for the entirety of my career, a gale force tailwind. I literally couldn't miss. And you know, they tell you in modern portfolio theory that on average, active managers can't beat the market. What they don't tell you is there are 200 million or 300 million participants in the market. So statistically, there are going to be tens of thousands of people who outperform the market by 2 standard deviations for their entire career on the basis of pure dumb luck. And I want you to understand, I'm one of them. Okay? So when I met Mark Zuckerberg in 2006, he had just turned 22 and I had just turned 50. I've been investing half my life. And I got asked by one of Mark's colleagues, would I take a meeting with his boss because there was a crisis and he needed to talk to somebody on the outside. No other information provided. The thing to understand, in 2006, there were a few things going on in Silicon Valley that were really worth paying attention to. The PayPal mafia, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Reid Hoffman and that gang, had 2 unbelievably powerful insights. The first was that the internet was shifting from a web of pages to a web of people, and that the limitations on technology that had constrained everybody around here for the prior 50 years, that had made us focus on the narrowest, most important functionality that people needed at any point in time. Those were going away, and you're for the first time going to be able to create global products. You were going to be able to create services like Amazon Web Services that would allow entrepreneurs to buy the $100 million or $200 million worth of infrastructure that previously you had to build just to launch your product, which meant the cost of a startup was going to go from $100 million to $10 million. It meant instead of needing 45 to 50-year-old entrepreneurs, you could do it with 20-year-olds. So when Mark started Facebook, he literally started it at the perfect moment in time. And I was absolutely convinced, even in 2006, when it was just available to high school and college students with their school address, when it was just a Facebook, picture, address, and relationship status, that he was going to be bigger than Google. And I was convinced of that because I had watched MySpace, Friendster, and America Online all fail in their social activity because, in my opinion, anonymity allowed trolls and bad actors to overwhelm the platforms. So I was really excited to meet Mark. And the first day we met, he comes into my office And you know, it's 6 months after the end of the timeline of the Social Network movie, and he looks just like Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, he's got the sandals, he's got the skinny jeans, got the t-shirt, the hoodie, courier bag. He sits down, I sit down. I'm closer to him than I am to Ann right now. We're in these comfy chairs in this conference room at Elevation. And I said, Mark, before you say a word, I got to give you some context for why I took this meeting. And I said, look, if it hasn't already happened, either Microsoft or Yahoo is going to offer $1 billion for your company. And everybody you know, your parents, your board of directors, your management team, employees, friends, everybody can tell you, Mark, you got no revenue. Take the money. It's $1 billion. You'll have $650 million bucks and we'll be rich. Take the money. Your venture capitalist, Jim Breyer, he's going to tell you he'll back your next company. I said, Mark, you need to know there's two things I know for sure after 24 years as an investor. One is no entrepreneur in the history of Silicon Valley ever had the perfect idea at the perfect time twice. Nobody. Not Steve Jobs, not anybody. And I'm convinced you got the perfect idea at the perfect time. You're going to be bigger than Google. Secondly, I don't care who buys this company, they're going to kill it. If you believe this idea, the only way to make it happen is for you to take it out. What followed that was the most painful 5 minutes of my entire life. Mark didn't say a word. He was thinking really hard. Did he trust me? Did he not trust me? In the end, he relaxes and he goes, you won't believe this. But that's the reason I'm here. That story you just told, that just happened. Exactly as you said. How did you know? And I go, I didn't know. I just know all the people around here. I've been around here a long time. I mean, this is how things work around here. What do you want to do? And he said, well, what am I going to do? Everybody wants to sell the business but me. I can't run it by myself. And I said, hang on, dude. You got plenty of money. You got a great idea. It's really working. They don't get to tell you that the song's over. Let me explain to you how to walk them off the cliff. And so he went back, and the whole meeting took less than half an hour. He went back and he told everybody. And I think in retrospect, they're all pretty happy that he talked them out of selling the company. So he had this problem, right, that everybody wanted to sell the company. So it was helpful to have a new advisor who believed in his vision. So for a period of 3 years, I got to be one of many advisors that he had. And the principal thing I did was help to bring Cheryl in. And I'd known Cheryl because she introduced me to Bono, and I'd helped to introduce her to Google. And so you can imagine, I was just so proud of Facebook. I thought Mark was different. I thought the culture of the Valley at the time, which was this, it was replacing the hippie libertarianism of Steve Jobs, that notion of empowering people, with a different kind of libertarianism that was really more about building monopoly, disrupting and dominating, that you didn't really worry about what the rules were. You just kind of went and did things. You didn't ask permission, you begged forgiveness. That culture was very uncomfortable for me. And in the early days, I think Mark had a different view, or at least that's what I thought he had. And so I was blissfully a fan. I mean, just a huge fan. And I got to the end of my career and I'd retired before I realized there was something wrong. Not to say that there weren't signals. There were signals. And as an analyst, I should have put them together better than I did. But I didn't. And I feel bad about that.
So how did you move from an advisor to a skeptic? Were there key points
Well,
along
to be
the
clear,
way?
there was a middle point in the way where I was just a fan, right? Where, I was
Okay.
not regularly interacting with either Mark or Cheryl. And, I stopped being an insider in 2009 because, the things I was really good at, he didn't need anymore. And so I'm just a cheerleader. And then I retire in December of 2015. And in January, I start to see things that don't fit my preconceived notion of this company I loved and these people I loved. First, it was in the Democratic primary in New Hampshire. I start to see memes coming out of Facebook groups that are associated notionally with the Bernie Sanders campaign. But they were spreading virally among my friend group in a way that suggested somebody was spending money to get people into a group whose only purpose was to spread misogynistic memes. That struck me as really weird. Then 2 months later, Facebook expelled a company that was using the ad tools to gather data on people who expressed an interest in Black Lives Matter. and they were selling that data to police departments. Now, Facebook did the right thing, right? They expelled them. The problem was the damage had been done. Police departments were harassing these people. Then in June of 2016, the United Kingdom votes on the Brexit referendum to leave the European Union. And you may know the outcome was a huge shock, 8-point swing during the day of the referendum. And it occurred to me that, wow, what if the Facebook tools that allow, ideas to spread so rapidly, what if there's something about them that gives an unfair advantage to really intense, nasty messages over neutral ones? Because the Leave campaign had this intense xenophobic message. And the Remain campaign was kind of, hey, stay the course. And I'm sitting there going, wow, if that's true, that's like really bad for democracy. But I don't know. I have no data. So I start going to look for friends to say, is anybody seeing this? And I actually reached out to Facebook too, but I didn't know what I was seeing. So it was really hard to connect with anyone. I mean, connect with them in the sense of convey what my concerns were. We then find out about Manafort in August. And around Labor Day, Walt Mossberg asks me, from Recode, Walt Mossberg asked me to write an op-ed, which I start drafting. But I'm not in any huge hurry because it doesn't even occur to me that the US election could be in danger. Again, real failure of analysis. I guess I was retired. And anyway, long story short, two things happen. First, Housing and Urban Development, Department of the US government, cites Facebook for advertising tools that enable discrimination in housing, the very thing they were sued over a few weeks ago. But that was the first salvo of it. And then the intelligence agencies say the Russians are actively interfering in the US election. At that point, I freak out. I realize I'm not going to do an op-ed. I got to reach out to Mark and Cheryl. They're my friends. I'm a huge believer in this company. And so on the 30th of October, 9 days before the election, I send them the draft op-ed and say, guys, I think there is something wrong with the business model and algorithms that's allowing bad actors to harm innocent people. And we got to get on top of it. Now, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't sent them the op-ed. I wish I'd rewritten it because the op-ed is, it's designed to be provocative, and it would have been better if I'd been a little bit more level. But they got right back to me, and they couldn't have been more friendly, but they didn't embrace it like it was a real business issue. They treated it like a PR problem. And they handed me off to Dan Rose, who was a real good friend of mine, so I was actually totally psyched to talk to him. But Dan's job was to essentially contain the PR problem. And he goes, Roger, we do not have a problem here. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act says we're a platform, not a media company. So we're not responsible for what third parties do. And I go, Dan, you got civil rights problems and you got some weird stuff in democracy. You think people are going to let you off the hook for that? He goes, yeah, we don't have a problem. Anyway, the election happens. At that point, I go completely ballistic. I go, Dan, you have got to get on this. You have got to do what Johnson & Johnson did when some asshole put poison in bottles of Tylenol in Chicago in 1982. The CEO of Johnson & Johnson, the very day the story happened, pulled every bottle of Tylenol off every retail shelf in the United States and Canada, no questions asked, and didn't put them back till they invented tamper-proof packaging. I said, Dan, you have to leap to the defense of the people who use your product. You cannot have the uncertainty. You are in a trust business. If you let the trust get broken, you will never earn it back. I spent 3 months begging him to do this. And he's just hiding behind Section 230. And I go, eventually I give up. And it's at that point that I faced a moment of truth that maybe one or more of you will face at some point in your life. I saw something really wrong, something with issues that I could see already for democracy and issues for civil rights. I was retired. I could have sat back and just said, this is somebody else's problem. But the other side of the coin was, I'd been a small part of this, and I'd profited from it. And I felt a moral and emotional need to take what I knew, to take my biography, and try to start a conversation about what had happened. It was a really hard decision.
So as part of your journey from an investor to a skeptic to an activist, it struck me in reading your story that you think Facebook is essentially a closed system and that the leaders are not willing to engage in sort of this big picture thinking. We've seen them go on the sort of apology tour over and over and over again, and I wonder when.
It's worked really well, right? Move fast, break things, apologize, repeat.
Okay, some might say that, but when did you realize that they were this? Is it fair to am I describing this correctly? Do you think they are a closed? It's a closed culture there.
To me, I
that
think
added to your doubts here.
To me, that's not. The answer is yes, but that's not the operative thing. I mean, Facebook exists in a culture here in the Valley, which in turn exists in a culture in the United States of America, where we have deregulated for 44 years. We have essentially gone from a version of capitalism, the standard version, where the government sets the rules and enforces them across the entire economy so that it's fair for everyone, to a world with essentially very few rules and almost no enforcement, where businesses are encouraged to grab whatever they can grab while they can grab it. And we've gone from this world that Peter Drucker, who was a great management guru of the industrial age back when I was young, he would say there are 5 stakeholders, right? Shareholders, employees, the communities where employees live, customers, and suppliers. And that it was the duty of management to balance the interests of all 5, because that's how you maintain, it was a Zen-like harmony that you would maintain over time. But over the last 40 years, we've abandoned 4 of the 5. And essentially all companies in the economy abuse their suppliers, many of them abuse their customers, they couldn't care less about the communities where people live, and many of them have treated their employees badly. And so I look at this, and by the way, that has been standard operating procedure, right? I mean, if Rex Tillerson is allowed to conduct a separate foreign policy at Exxon in contravention of our sanctions against Russia, if Wells Fargo Bank can get away with essentially defrauding millions of account holders, if the entire banking industry can do 2008 and not be punished, it's really hard to expect Silicon Valley to have a higher set of standards than that. And so, to me, that was a big part of the problem, was that, these are not bad people, right? That's the key thing. I don't think the managers are bad. I don't think the people are bad who work there. I think the issue is the culture is just way off track. We kept doing the same thing over and over again, and we forget that there's natural pendular action in society to keep things in balance, and we're just out of balance. And so, when I look at Facebook, let's face it, that company was so successful for so long, you can't blame them for thinking, if critic, then wrong, right? I mean, I'm sure they looked at me and said, Roger, if you're so smart, where are your 2.5 billion users, right? I get that. That's just how the world works, okay? The incentives are misaligned, and it's way bigger than Facebook, way bigger than Silicon Valley. And demonstrably, you can see that there's a beginning of a change, right? We've had at least 5 teacher actions, labor actions in the last year, all successful. First successful teacher labor actions, I think, in a generation. The air traffic controllers with a partial sick-out ended a government shutdown in 2 hours. And McDonald's has abandoned the fight against 15. Those are all incredibly important indicators that we just may have reached the furthest limit of this pendular swing, and that we're going to begin to swing back. So I'm extremely optimistic about that. And again, I look at Facebook and I think their behavior, even now, like Mark, I give Mark a lot of credit because he's coming out and talking in public now. Now, I think what he's saying is nonsense, but his PR department creates that, right? And they do what their job is, right? Which is to create nonsense, to distract. I get that, right? I mean, I've been around a long time. It's like, this is how it works. I'm not going to hold them to a higher standard than everybody else, but I want to hold everybody to a higher standard than we've held them to for the last few years.
Okay, well, let me just drill down a little bit on this, because in the book on the character issue and culture issue, you say, Mark Zuckerberg created a culture in which criticism and disagreement apparently had no place.
Yeah,
you say you didn't realize that Mark Zuckerberg's ambition had no limit. You say that Facebook's secret sauce is its ability to imitate and improve on ideas of others and scale them.
What I'm saying is I was a terrible analyst for a number of years, okay? That's really the conclusion. All of that was obvious to anybody covering the company. So can I take a minute, because I want to talk about what I think the real problem is here. Because I think Facebook is by no means, Facebook is the biggest problem we have for democracy. But if you sit there and you think about, there are 4 classes of problem. There are public health issues, there's democracy issues, there's privacy issues, and then there's the whole structure of the economy. And I want to dial it back to 2002, and I want to look at what the incredible genius of Google and what they did. In 2002, Google behaves just like a classic marketer. They have one product. It's a search engine. They gather data from the people who use it to make that product better. Completely normal, natural thing to do. The business model is based on ad targeting related to purchase intent, right? You want to go on vacation, you look up places to go, you look up airlines, you look up hotels, the whole 9 yards, right? They do the analysis, they discover they only need a few % of the data in order to make the engine better, so they look at it and go, well, is there any signal in the rest, in the other 97, 98%? And they not only discover a signal, but it's for something much bigger than purchase intent. It's behavioral prediction. The big enchilada. But they look at it and they go, holy shit, we got this problem. We don't even know who these people are. So they create Gmail. Now, Gmail gives them identity to attach to purchase intent. That makes the ads wildly more valuable, right? Makes the targeting better so the consumer has a better experience. So far, everybody's fine. But then, this is where the culture of the Valley, the culture of America takes over. They realize, well, they can do way better. If you're going to be in the behavioral prediction market, what is the single best source of intelligence for behavioral prediction? It's people's emails. You tell people what you're going to do. So they got to find an excuse for reading the emails. So they go, ha, business model. We'll give it away for free. We'll put ads in it. And we'll tell them we got to scan the emails in order to target the ads. They'll hate the ads, but we'll at least get to scan the emails. So they gave us duck food in the form of ads. We got pissed. We forced them to get rid of the ads, but they continue to scan the emails. You say to yourself, well, is that okay? Remember, they've told us they're not a media company. They're a platform, which means they're a common carrier. Postal Service reads your mail, they go to jail. Federal Express reads your docs, they go to jail. Common carriers are not allowed to read the content of the stuff going through them. And remember what consent is. Consent in common law requires both sides to have the same understanding. Demonstrably not true here. So, that, however, is a genius way if you want to get into behavioral prediction, and there are no rules, right? Nobody's got a problem with it, so they move on. They go to Maps, find out where everybody is. So with Maps, they gather all this data, create this incredibly convenient set of services, and the next thing you know, they can predict what you're going to do, right? But their problem here is they need to understand the routes and everything that's going on, so they'd run some behavioral manipulation experiments, right? This route over here, not enough people take it. We don't know how long it takes, so we're going to give it to you and tell you that's the suggested route this morning. We're going to see if we can get you to take it. And of course we did, right? We've all had that experience. You get it in Waze now all the time, right? They give you this thing, oh, it's only going to take 23 minutes. 37 minutes later, you're pulling up where you're going, right? So now they're in the behavioral manipulation business, and that's not what we signed up for. That's when they have the genius insight. There's all this unclaimed data in the economy. And the economy is incredibly inefficient because there's all this uncertainty, but if we get all this data, we can take the uncertainty out of it. So they start driving cars up and down the street. They call it street view. The Germans go, wait a minute, that's my house, that's my kid, that's my dog. You can't do that. That's what the Stasi used to do. Everybody else goes, no problem. Then they do satellite view, right? So if you're in the breaking and entering business, you've now got street view and satellite view. And then they tried Google Glass. Remember that? Now they're going around and they're getting real time. The other two things are static, but this is real time. And lots of facial recognition, lots of individual walking routes, driving routes, all kinds of cool stuff. But we hated it, right? We called them glass holes. Right? Remember that? So they go back into the labs. They repackage it as a video game. They spin it out as a separate company called Niantic. They called it Pokemon Go. They got 1 billion people wandering around with their smartphones, taking pictures of everything. Now the behavioral manipulation gets really interesting. If we put a Pokemon in private property, will people climb over a fence? It turns out they would. If we put a Pokemon in a Starbucks, can we get you to go in and buy some coffee? You bet. How about if we do it in the third Starbucks and give you 10 cents off and see whether you'll go a little further? Yeah, you'll do that too. Really, the largest behavioral manipulation experiment ever run outside of China. Really, really successful. And we're in a different world now, right? Our whole thing is we love these apps, but we think what we're getting is better targeting. But what's really going on is large-scale behavioral manipulation, where it's not our data causing that. It's everybody else's data. Then what happens? Then they go, wait a minute, but now there's all this data that other people own. Let's go and buy it. So they go to your bank. They go to Datalogics. They go to Experian and Equifax. They buy all your financial data. They go to the cellular carriers, get all your location data. They've already got the data from Uber and Lyft. They go to health and wellness apps, and they get all that stuff. They do all this tracking. They scan your documents. They've built a data avatar of each and every one of us, whether you're on the platform or not. And the problem is only 1% of the value is in the stuff you put in. Most of it's the metadata, the tracking, the browsing history and the stuff they acquire. And then we're in the world of certainty, right? Because what they're selling to the advertiser is that. So think about this. Anybody here seen Google CAPTCHA, right? They say, are you a robot? Tell me, look at these pictures of cars or street signs or whatever, right? You know what's going on, right? You're training the self-driving cars, right? Google's AI for self-driving cars, right? That's why they never show you things of livestock. I mean, I want the ones that tell me the difference between a pig and an elephant, right? That's what I'm waiting for. But no, you're training the AI for self-driving. They know you're a human because of the way your mouse moves. And they save everything. So I assume for me, they have this long profile of my mouse movement. Here's the thing. Someday, I'm likely to develop Parkinson's disease. Now, what app is likely to see the very first symptom of Parkinson's disease? An app that's measuring the movement of my mouse. And here's what's wrong with the model. I'm not their customer. I'm not even their product. I'm the fuel for this data avatar. I'm a source of data. They're under no obligation to tell me that I have a potential medical diagnosis. They're under no obligation to protect my privacy. And all the financial incentives are to sell that certainty to the highest bidder. Now, who will value it the most? My insurance company, who will either raise my rates or cut off my insurance, and I won't even know I'm sick, because if they tell me, then it's a pre-existing condition. Those are terrible incentives. So my basic point to you is what's happened here, and Google perfected this, but now Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft are playing this game also. There's all this data in the economy, all this data in society. And with it, you can take uncertainty out of life. But here's the thing to think about. When you wake up in the morning, right, you have free will. You have the ability to choose. Are you going to go to work today? Not go to work today. Eat breakfast? Don't eat breakfast. Exercise? Don't exercise. But if everything in life is certain, what happens to free will? In an economic sense, what happens to choice? That's the question that we have to ask today. And what I've discovered is that when I go around and I do this thing, it doesn't matter what the politics are of the people I talk to. They go, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like China. And I go, that's because it is China. Right? When Google says you can't regulate us because we have to compete with China and AI, I go, well, why do we want to do that? Why do we want to be competing with China in behavioral modification? That'd be like saying we want to compete with them in cloning babies or time-release anthrax, right? We got better things to do. AI is the penicillin of the 21st century. Let's apply it to things that make our lives better.
So, let's see here. Behavioral predictions, that's the root of all of it. You also talk about the addictions that this technology
Yeah,
has
but
fed to
the
us.
addictions, think of this.
And the anonymity of
Yeah.
creating tribes and polarization. So what you say in your book are the two biggest things you outlined there are the threats to, in addition to what you've just said, public health with our addiction to our phones and technology, as well as the threats to our democracy.
Everybody says to me, Roger, how do I...
So my question is at the root of this, what's the key design problem here
Yeah.
that you would like to see solved to fix all this?
So here's what the problem is. If you're in the behavioral prediction business, you do not want to be stuck with the data related to our public selves, right? Because we're all on our best behavior here, right? If you want to find out what people are really about, you have to pierce the shell of civility around each one of us. And the best way to do that, right, is to provoke us, right? So if you think about what engagement is, right, if your problem here is that you want to build a habit, and then with the habit you want to then feed the habit with things that engage people, right? And it turns out that people are most engaged by stuff that either triggers flight or fight, which would be outrage or fear, or really conspiracy theories, or disinformation. And nobody really knows why disinformation is so successful, but it is. And so essentially what this is about is you want to get people into an unstable state to find out what they're really like. I mean, what happens when you expose them to anti-Semitism? How do they react? What happens when you expose them to hate speech? What happens when you expose them to the threat of some, let's say, a measles outbreak, right? The problem with the business model is that, it depends on hate speech, fear, outrage, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. Those are the things that bring out what they need for behavioral prediction. Those are not the things they need for great ad targeting, right? This is what you need if you want to eventually go to behavioral manipulation. And so my point here is that when I look at GDPR, when I look at the California privacy law, I see things that fail in two ways. They fail because, first of all, they only address 1% of the problem. They don't address metadata, they don't address browser history, and they don't address the data acquired from third parties, which is where most of the value is. But secondly, they happen after the fact. If you want to solve the problem, you have to take away the incentive to have inappropriate stuff there in the first place. I don't want to be in the censoring business. I want to be in the business of eliminating the amplification of the content that essentially creates political polarization and creates all these unhealthy outcomes. And so I think the way to do that is the first step is to ask political questions. Why is it legal for somebody to scan your email or your documents? Why is it legal for there to be a third-party commerce in your most intimate personal data? Why is it even legitimate to capture data on children at all? That's the debate we need to have in 2020. And that's the debate that, interestingly enough, brings people together. Because it doesn't matter whether they're left or right. This is an issue of right or wrong, not right or left. And what I've found in the 10 weeks so far of my book tour is it doesn't matter whether I'm on Fox or MSNBC, Fox Business, CNBC, Conservative Talk Radio, NPR. Everybody goes, wait a minute, you're right. Why is any of that stuff legal? Because if you could take that away, then we would go back to a model that wasn't built on the bad stuff. Bad stuff would still happen, but it wouldn't be part of the design. And again, this is really important. I'm not suggesting that any of these people are bad people or they did this on purpose. These are the unintended consequences of a well-intended strategy, where the well-intended strategy was to connect the whole world in Facebook's case, or to expose all the world's information in Google's case. The problem was they were in such a hurry, they failed to put in circuit breakers, they failed to think about containment strategies, because that was the culture of the time. I get it. This is just like the chemical industry 30 years ago. Chemical companies used to be able to pour mercury into fresh water. right? They left mine tailings on the side of the hill, right? If you're at a gas station, you poured your used oil into the sewer. And for like 50 years, nobody said anything. But then the externalities started to pile up, and people went, wait a minute, this is no good. And they went back to the guys who created the problem and said, hey, toxic oil spill, toxic chemical spill, your problem, you clean it up. I think we're looking at toxic digital spills, that's all. No, seriously. This isn't about people. This is about, hey, look, we had a business culture for a long time. I just think it's time to change the culture. And the reason I want to use antitrust laws is because I believe all problems create a much bigger business opportunity in the form of when you make the solution. That the really simple thing here is, these guys aren't going to go away. You're just going to create this huge new industry. And the history of tech is that starting in '56 with AT&T with the consent decree, first we created the computer industry, but we got the transistor at AT&T and created all of Silicon Valley. Right? Then IBM, you created the software business and PCs. Then the second AT&T, you accelerate cellular phones and you create broadband data, which creates the commercial internet. And then Microsoft, you create the second wave internet. And every time the target company goes to all-time highs. The big complaint about those things was you didn't actually get rid of the monopoly, you just created a whole new industry. I'm going, well, hang on, I'm okay with that, right? But you gotta stop them from blocking everything. So we used the antitrust thing that we used on AT&T long distance, right? Which was we created MCI and Sprint by giving them access at really extraordinarily low rates to the long distance line. Well, in this case, what you're gonna do is very simple. Any new startup that has a business model that fits the pattern we're looking for, which is, say, not exploitive of people, gets free access to advertising for customer acquisition on the big platforms. And let's just say it's free up to 100 million people. We can pick the number, but just think about that for a minute. What would that do for innovation? How many startups do you think we'd have if it was free for the first 100 million people? How would that change the cost of doing a startup? Right? Because the problem you got right now is that Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they've got like 80% of all the AI people in North America, and they're all working on behavioral modification. So if you want to do something else, you got to compete with that. How does that work? They have these marketplaces where they provide perfect information on one side, right? Faustian bargain because there's no brand value, right? Everybody gets the same perfect information. But the guys on the other side, the consumers, they only get the data that Google and Facebook give them, right? So once they figure out your economics, the prices you see, the options you see are tailored to what they know about you because they're removing uncertainty. Again, I'm a big believer in choice. I'm a believer in capitalism. I'd like to get back to it.
Okay, we're going to take a couple questions. Let me ask one more, and the microphone is. Let me just ask one more, and then we'll turn to you.
And then, if we could, I'd love at least one or two women to come over here and ask questions.
Okay.
Really
So we've talked about now. It sounds like you feel like there's some momentum. You and Tristan Harris, your colleague, have gained some momentum in capturing the attention of the public, of legislators in California as well as in Washington, D.C. And this debate and this conversation is becoming national. So.
Yeah, I don't give us credit for it. I actually give journalists much more credit than I give ourselves because today hardly a day goes by without another story about something really important going on.
We like to hear that. We've talked, and then in terms of solutions, we've talked a little bit about technical fixes. We've talked, I think I'd like to hear what you think we personally can do. And
you
then
can
start
the next generation companies.
Go ahead.
Right? I want somebody to make a mouse product that tells me if I've got the first symptom of Parkinson's disease, right? It's an insurance product. Just think about every single thing that happens on the internet today. Reverse the polarity of the business model. Instead of treating the consumer as the fuel, treat them as the customer. What does that business model look like? It's not going to create things of the scale of Google and Facebook, but it is going to create 1,000 companies with $1 billion market cap, okay? And that should be enough, right? I mean, I think that's a cool thing if you get to save democracy and you get to save public health and you get to save privacy and you get to save the economy, right? And I may be wrong, but let's have that conversation. Let's have it right here. right? Because, I mean, this is where so many good ideas originate.
There's a question of how and when and if the regulators can jump in, and will they be effective? You've suggested banning bots,
So,
stopping acquisitions, being transparent about political ads, and algorithms.
None of the stuff that has happened so far addresses the underlying problems. What we're really trying to do is to restart a regulatory infrastructure that's been moribund for 25 years. And that's really hard, right? I mean, the FTC and the Antitrust Division of Justice have done nothing that was related to consumer harm since the Microsoft case. And I'm working with both of them, and it's a little bit slow going, but I have the economics department of law school of another university that have found a way to use Chicago school antitrust against these platforms. And the model is very straightforward. We've always said the services are free, but that's actually not correct. It's a barter of services for personal data. The data is the currency. And what happens, it's really obvious when you look at either Facebook or Google that the price in data has been rising geometrically. I mean, well, let's just say it's been rising at a very steep slope, okay? And the marker for that is simply average revenue per user. The suite of services really hasn't been changing much, and the individual value of an action on any service doesn't change much, and yet the value of the data being given up is going up very significantly. And so that model, we have a Nobel Prize was awarded last year for a similar analysis relative to carbon credits. And so there are probably people in the econ department here working on things like this. And I would invite those people to reach out to me because I think it's really straightforward. And so working with Justice and FTC on that, working with some state AGs. The Europeans got a huge running start, but they got a running start before we understood the full scope of the problem. So the things they've done, are too narrow. And the thing in the UK and the thing in Australia is nuts, okay? The thing in the UK is maybe nuts, maybe not. Here it wouldn't work, there it may. But what's going on is governments are fed up. And they're fed up because Facebook says the same thing over and over again, expecting a different response. And Google says, we're not involved. And they're furious. And so they're doing dumb stuff. They're getting ever bigger mallets, right? And we got to get serious about this, right? Otherwise, real harm's going to get done that you can't fix. And I think New Zealand changes a lot of things politically because New Zealand is really a theater piece, right? That terrorist took the architecture of the internet, so the ability of malcontented people to find each other and connect, to act anonymously in their own interest. And then they exploited the architecture of every social media platform, right? Both in advance and after the fact, to amass a group, spread the toxic stuff, and then amplify it. And the problem here isn't just that it took 17 minutes for Facebook to even notice there was a problem and like an hour before they did anything about it. The problem was, if it had taken 1 second, it would have already been too late. And there is no circuit breaker. I suspect at least one country in this calendar year will mandate that they have a button that can shut down any internet service during a problematic period. That demonstrably shutting down YouTube would have been extremely helpful at limiting the spread of this and potentially changing the incentives, right? It may be enough for a terrorist just to shut down YouTube, right? So we have to think all that stuff through. But really harsh stuff is coming. And, because the thing with New Zealand worked so well, and there's nothing out there to prevent it from happening again.
One last question. How about the role of investors in all of this?
Well,
you still own stock in Facebook.
I do.
If you think it is such a catastrophe, is the word in the title of your book, why are you still allowing your money to remain in Facebook instead of another
The
social?
money in Facebook is very simple. I didn't want anyone to accuse me of speaking ill of a company whose stock I had just sold. My theory was I'd made a lot of money in this stock, and if my actions were going to cause it to go down, I was going to share that with everyone else. That's a personal value judgment. You can agree or disagree. I think investors have a huge role to play. It is time to get off the nonsense of just focusing on shareholder value. It is time to start looking at society. It's time to start looking at employees, communities where they live, customers and suppliers again. And, you know, I'm not going to win that argument by myself. But we have to stop looking at big data the way we're looking at it. We got to start thinking about inverting the polarity and exposing that data to make consumers' lives more successful. We got to stop viewing people as a source of fuel. It's really bad. And nothing is worth it. Right? If we can't see that, then we need to read more books. We need to meet more people. We need to actually visit with the people who've been harmed. Because remember, you didn't need to be on Facebook to be dead in Myanmar. You just needed to be a Rohingya. You didn't need to be on any of these platforms to be dead in New Zealand. You just needed to be a Muslim in one of those mosques. You didn't need to be on a platform to have your business destroyed in the United Kingdom. You just need to be EU-centric. Right? This is not small stuff. These are people's lives. And we've lost sight of that. And again, I may be the wrong messenger for you, but think about the message. Find someone who is. Because we can do better. We really can.
Okay. Okay, we're going to take some questions. And our first question is going to come from Carlos Gomez Uribe, who has worked on algorithms at Netflix, Google, and most recently, Facebook. He has been a more recent insider in Facebook than you have, Roger. So, Carlos, thanks.
Thank you. More than a question, I mostly have a comment. It is quite refreshing to hear your perspective. I think it's important, and I'd love to see more discussions of this kind. And I also want to state with the obvious, which is I think where you ended, which is that many of these algorithms can actually be quite helpful at improving how we make decisions.
Exactly.
I worked on search at Google first for 2 years. I was deeply involved over 7 years at Netflix, so I know how both all the recommendations there and the search works inside and out. I invented a bunch of those that are running in production. And because, like you, I grew increasingly concerned with the role of Facebook in helping us understand their collective reality and then making decisions, for example, in the ballots. I reached out and I offered to join them, doing what I know how to do, which is to build algorithms. And I joined them for 1.5 years as a director supposedly in charge of what they call integrity for newsfeed. That's their terminology that includes hate speech, includes misinformation, and so on. And before going there, before getting to Facebook, I was super interested in being able to make a positive difference in diminishing these problems. I expected them to be the hardest technical problems I had seen, just because they reflect essentially all of human complexity. And I assumed that Facebook, having all the smart people that I knew they had, must have tried all the obvious things one should try to make algorithms that are high quality, meaning that create incentives for higher quality content and for higher quality interactions. And I left there after 1.5 years because, like you, I completely lost trust, not only in Mark and Cheryl, but in at least three layers of leadership at Facebook.
One of the things that's interesting about this problem is, remember, they've eliminated pornography, right? I mean, they're plenty smart enough if they want to get rid of a lot of the stuff, right?
Yeah.
They could make it a lot less. The problem is that they need something that activates the lizard brain to find out what we're really like, right?
Well, yes and no. I think in the case of Facebook, yes, they do. And maybe more generally, when you're thinking about a business model that relies on advertising, where again, the users of their products are the product themselves.
Right.
So one point is that I don't think that is true about all internet tech companies. So for
Clearly
example,
not. Well, you were at
but-
Netscape. I mean,
yes,
Netflix.
Exactly. So Netflix, as a
Can I say,
subscription service.
because I want to point to Netflix as a really interesting thing, because Netflix obviously has the ability to do harm if it wanted to, but demonstrably is not doing so, right? At least that's the way it looks to me. And I
Yeah, I
look at
think so.
Apple, they could do a lot of harm, and they're clearly trying not to, right? I mean, there are plenty of
Exactly.
existence proofs
So I
of
think
this
that
being done
the
right.
business model can do quite a bit, but also, having people with morals, with ethics, people who care about the world and about individuals at the top, and who are willing to spend the time that's necessary to understand how their products, their platform actually works, and who are very thoughtful about it. That is not the way things are done at Facebook, unfortunately.
But I think you also pointed to it, the business model is the problem.
It's part of the problem.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
a
part
big,
of the
it's a
problem.
big part. I mean, it helps a lot to be Apple, to be Netflix, and have built a model where the consumer is your
Yeah.
customer.
So the last point I want to make, and then I'm happy to help take any questions about algorithms specifically. If it's
I'm going to
helpful.
sign books afterwards outside, so anybody else who has questions, I'll be outside for a while to
Oh,
talk
okay.
to you.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
I think we have time for just a few more.
Okay, so
No,
last
she's-
comment, quick comment.
she's
Many
telling
of the
us we're
people
done.
in these rooms, whether it's Google, Facebook, Netflix, making decisions about these products that end up affecting pretty much the entire world, not just America, so it's bad for the world, not just America, came from Stanford, their MBAs. They came from MIT, where I studied, from supposedly these amazing places where people are trained to be thoughtful. But once you get to these companies, not all of them, but particularly Facebook, you're too focused on how do you get promoted? How do you meet all the goals and expectations that are complete nonsense that they set for you, but you know that your income depends on that. And ultimately, I think if we are to change the way these companies run, in addition to thinking about regulation and business models, we also have to think about education and then creating generations of people who care not only about becoming rich and famous, but who actually deeply care about building things that are actually positive for the world. And the technology is there, AI. You can do many things with AI, but it's about how you use it. That's all. Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed the talk. I'm a student and I'm in a club called CS Plus Social Good here at Stanford. And I think we're also carrying on some of the discussions and conversations that you wish to have. Yeah, so my question is more focused on a subtopic in your book. So you argued about how polarization is intensified on social media because personal views have previously been kept in check by social pressures, are not so kept in check on those digital platforms. Do you think Facebook's content moderation efforts is enough to solve that problem? And if you think they should have more content moderation, how should we weigh that against the right to free speech on the digital sphere?
This is a great question. So I'm going to answer the second part first. So the question on moderation is really simple, in my opinion, which is remember that I'm a free speech person, but you have to distinguish, as my partner Renee DiResta says, between freedom of speech and freedom of reach. The issue that we're dealing with here is I don't want to restrict what people put on, but I don't want to have a business model that amplifies asymmetrically the most negative voices in society. And so I think content moderation is now, say, a probability 0.8 or higher, can't work at this scale, okay? No matter how many people you put on it. The basic notion is the reason they want content moderation is they want to gather all that data. They want to get that first pass reaction from people so they can pierce the veneer of civility, right? So moderation fits the current business model. So I would argue that you have to change the business model if you're really serious about these problems, okay? I think moderation is the wrong approach, and I just don't think you'll ever get there. And again, I'm not a scientist, I can't prove that, but I thought the Motherboard massive essay on that topic and all the journal stuff I've seen since then makes me think moderation's not the way.
Okay, if you don't have to dash to class, we'll take just one more there. Can you give him the mic,
You're going to have to
please?
speak much louder.
So on the one hand, you say that the core problem here, one of the core problems is culture, as opposed to like specifically bad people. On the other hand, you kind of admitted that Zuck created a culture at Facebook where criticism and disagreement pretty much had no place, which if they had been able to be there, probably we wouldn't be facing these problems. So how do you change culture without actually being able to call out bad behavior from the people in charge? If you don't call that out, doesn't that actually create the culture that enables this
That's
whole
a great
situation?
question. These are all amazing questions. So the question of culture specific to company versus the country as a whole. I believe that the culture of business in the country is that's the driving thing. Facebook has a specific set of cultural issues, but the culture, the thing that caused Google to go the way it went, the thing that caused Mark to believe it was okay to build a global footprint, to this massive network without any circuit breakers and without any containment strategy, those were the result of an external culture that they just grew up in at this point in time.
Okay, but isn't it time now to actually say like, hey, Mark, like whatever the reasons were, like this isn't okay?
So
And
I'm with you
I guess
completely.
my question is it time to ask for these leaders like Zuck and Sandberg to step down?
Oh, okay. So here's what my problem is. Changing culture in a company, short of a massive crisis, is almost impossible to do. And only Zuck has the ability to change the culture at Facebook. What I'm praying for is that he gets a really good night's sleep and wakes up and has an epiphany and realizes that he can do more good by fixing the culture and business model of Facebook than he can do with 1,000 Chan Zuckerberg initiatives. Now, I think counting on that is probably not super realistic, but I don't exclude it, okay? I mean, the Mark I knew years and years ago, that wasn't a 0%.
I mean, aren't we kind of past that now? We've kind of been through this.
We
kind
may
of
be,
apology.
we may be, but keep in mind, my job, there's limits to what I can say in that area, okay? I'm not super credible when it comes to, the specifics of Mark. I haven't talked to him, right? You know what I mean? I'm out of touch there. My gut instinct, though, is that if you don't change the business model, it doesn't matter who runs the company. Conversely,
I guess what
if
I'm
you
saying
change
is
the business model, it also doesn't matter.
If you've been a friend, it's like you're one of the few people who, if you were friends with Zuck, you would have the power to actually be able to tell him this in a way that he could hear it. But if you can't even tell him this,
That's a problem.
We got a problem.
I agree with you. Sorry. I'm letting you draw that conclusion, right? Don't make me keep saying it out loud, okay? It can't be personal between me and them, right? That completely destroys my platform, okay? I need to focus on the ideas, right? They are my friends. It's not necessary for me to go there to make the argument I need to make here. And so I totally respect what you've just said, but I'm not going to engage with it beyond pointing out that if you don't fix the business model, it literally doesn't matter who runs it. Anybody you put in there with this business model, you're going to get the same outcome.
Okay, and with that,
I'm
unfortunately.
going to sign some stuff out here. If you want to ask follow-ups, I'll be there.
All right, thank you for a great conversation.